Walking these streets so cold, empty, eyes drift past each other, lost in shadows of our minds, broken hearts seeking cover. Whispers in the wind too faint, cynics painting dreams in gray. No one listens, no one cares, bitter souls with much to say. Oh, we're jaded, we are torn, living in this fractured dawn, polarized and so forlorn, trying to find where we belong. Silent cries behind closed doors, masking the pain that's ever known. Confusion tangled in our veins, searching for a love we've never shown. Falling stars in the night, splitting skies without a sound. Hopes too weary to ignite in this jaded battleground.
This is Jay Burke of the With Jay Burke Show, and you are listening to the Untitled Project 2025 project. Along with me is
I'm Smith from the Story of Podcast, also full-time teacher, social studies, American history, civics, and government.
I am Matt Beat from the YouTube channel Mr. Beat.
I'm Brandon from the podcast FDR's Wheelchair, where we talk politics with a comedic twist.
All right, and to let you know, Project 2025 proposes a comprehensive conservative overhaul of the federal government, targeting agency structures and policy priorities. In a politically polarized landscape with challenges to democratic norms, we aim with this podcast to provide a clear analysis of Project 2025, exploring its potential impact on American democracy, governance, and society. As we dive into this topic, it's essential to recognize that the future is shaped by the actions and decisions of American citizens, officials, and institutions. By fostering informed engagement, we hope to contribute to a meaningful debate about the future of American governance. All right, guys, so just to do a quick recap, in episode 1, we introduced Project 2025. We covered its origins, key players, and what the conservative vision of a streamlined executive branch, along with any of the concerns or impacts on civil liberties, things of that nature. In episode 2, we moved from theory to action. We explored how Project 2025's principles might shape government operations and their potential consequences. We also explored some of the historical influence of the Christian right on conservative policy and whether these initiatives were tried before. In this episode, we're exploring the potential impacts of Project 2025 on a global scale and for U.S. domestic policy. So we're going to dive into that, but I actually just wanted to ask a quick question, kind of roundtable type of question for us before we dive in. Just to remind you guys, the last recording we did, well, Smith, you weren't there for your own reasons, but it was the week, I believe it was the week following the Democratic National Convention. We discussed that a bit in detail with Mr. Beat, who was there. Tonight, we're recording on September 11th, which is just, well, obviously today's infamous, but now is a day after the now infamous Trump-Harris debate. I did notice she brought up Project 2025, at least mentioned it, though not as much as it was mentioned during the convention. So my question to you guys is this: do you think Project 2025 is still resonating with voters as strongly at this point?
I think it's resonating with voters that have been following politics. I think it's always on the forefront of the mind. Independents and undecideds who haven't been paying attention until now or just recently, I don't think so. I think it's kind of a blip on their radar, not really a full structured event that will happen if we have a Republican president to them, so they're not concerned about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and I think that I think you can kind of say that with a lot of different topics when it comes to politics, right? There are going to be certain people that are going to pay attention to it and certain people that are just going to kind of let it fly under the radar. But I do think there has been a substantial amount of attention and focus specifically on the Democrats to get this out there, right? To get this project out there. I don't know. I kind of get the same feeling that I feel like it's almost fizzling a little bit, and I don't know if that is a reaction specifically on the Democrat side because Trump is trying to distance himself from it, so much that it feels like I don't know if it's almost like beating a dead horse, to where they say it so much it doesn't really mean anything anymore, But yeah, I think it's people know about it for sure, but I don't know how far up on the ladder of importance it is, right? Or, I mean, it pales in comparison to, the economy. People are really upset when people are thinking about the stuff. They're thinking about more real world, what do they say, kitchen table conversations, with the, economics of the world. So yeah, I don't know. I think there are people that are certainly clued into it. I know there are people that certainly find it to be very scary, but I think there's a lot of other things that are in front of it on the pecking order of importance to a lot of voters.
Yeah, you, Mr. B. I was going to say you're kind of uniquely qualified for this question just because you were at the convention and probably got to hear a lot about it. And then obviously the debate's a little different because it's an hour and a half versus a week-long event. But
Well, I think at the DNC, it was brought up constantly. They even had that big prop that we mentioned that they brought onto the stage several times. But I think the fact that I think Harris only brought it up once or twice last night in the debate. So to me, that's evidence that perhaps they realize pretty much at this point, most Americans, if not like the vast majority, have at least heard of it. And yeah, most Americans have already made up their minds about it. There's really just that, I think, 2% of the voting population that really matters at this point that legitimately has not fully made up their mind. And many of them, I do think, are actually Republican leaning, which explains why Harris spent so much time in the debate kind of using Republican, like Bush era, Romney era rhetoric. I don't know if you guys
Right.
noticed that, but like it's a lot of like, oh wow, you don't really always sound like a Democrat. You sound like a Republican of yesteryear. So I feel like as far as Project 2025 being brought up now, the Democratic Party is hoping to specifically make those more moderate, never Trumpers, Republican voters aware of the more extreme policies in there.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only thing, I think it was brought up twice, and I think he actually brought it up once. I remember him mentioning it when he was going on one of his little,
I never read it.
I want to say explanations will be nice.
But
One
it
of
has
his
some good things and some bad things and some
Yeah.
Yeah.
abysmal thing. Yeah, but he never read it, so whatever.
Well, yeah, that was.
Yeah.
You heard about
Good-
it?
Good catch.
There might be one person or two who worked with me during my administration, not 140 or whatever. No, yeah, I think I mean, that caught on probably like a month or two ago. But I think most people know about that. They probably know that I think people are generally scared, whatever their information might be. They're
Mhm.
not sure what to make of it, but now they're probably focusing on trying to sell the economy because, I mean, that's what wins elections a lot of times. I mean, the James Carville saying it's the economy, stupid. So, but yes, sorry to throw that out to you. I just wanted to see where you guys were on that. So,
Good question.
yeah, well, how about we go into our first segment where we're going to talk about Project 2025 on the global stage and maybe some international reactions. I was going to look to you, Mr. Beat, a little bit on this, just because you're a student of history, and I don't think just American history, but obviously, we have a lot of things that are blowing up in the world. I'm focusing more on Russia, Ukraine with this more than the Israel situation, because I think we know what the stance is going to be. on that. But how do you think Project 2025, just from what you've seen, might influence regions like Ukraine, Russia, or even NATO at this point, because that's a part of that war?
Yeah, it's interesting because Project 2025 doesn't go into foreign policy too much, but when it does, it seems to be a little bit more moderate. Like when I say moderate, though, keep in mind that the dominant foreign policy of the last uh, 35, 40 years has been really neoconservatism, which means you want to have a more hawkish militaristic approach to hegemony, like basically maintaining that neo-imperialism of
Right.
the United States has had
Yeah.
during that entire time, meaning we have military bases in over 100 countries. We do whatever we can to spread democracy to, which is admittedly a better term than it was before, as we discussed last episode, where it used to be like, oh, we were just fighting communism, sometimes propping up authoritarian regimes in the name of doing so. It's still very anti-communistic to a point in terms of China. But the weird thing that you mentioned is Russia. That's such a weird, you could tell that this has had a big influence, like Trumpism has had a big influence on the Heritage Foundation, because you notice that whenever Russia comes up, it's like, okay, well, uh, there's only so much we can do, like,
Yeah.
sure, we
Yeah.
don't approve of Russia invading Ukraine, but come on, do we really want to get ourselves in another war? Which is fascinating to me
Yeah.
because all the other wars they're okay with, like they're okay with sending lots of weapons and uh, to Israel or to Saudi Arabia. They're okay with Saudi Arabia and Israel dropping lots of bombs on civilians. Perfectly fine with that. But sending weapons to Ukraine, no.
Yeah, and
So that's
Sudan and Syria.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all the other places too we're still at war at. That's another thing that I just can't get over, the rhetoric from many Trump supporters, and even a little bit here in the Project 2025 tends to be like, oh, maybe we should seek peace first. Like what are you talking
It's
about? Like the Republican Party is not the anti-war party. The Democratic Party really isn't either. Um, so it's a weird thing where it seems more token, like, oh, we want to stay out of wars. Be be uh be neutral, but only be neutral when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. So
yeah.
it's just ideologically inconsistent. At least neoconservatism was ideologically consistent.
Yes.
Like, spread democracy around the world, try to overthrow dictators and install democracies. This is not ideological as much.
Yeah.
What do you guys
Yeah.
think?
What do you guys? Yeah. How do you guys feel about that?
I continue to go back to the Russia thing, as Mr. Beat said, and I was thinking about it the other day, and like, why is Russia the one part of this that they're like, oh, we don't want to get entangled with that, but China, we're gonna
Yeah.
completely stop.
Or even Mexico.
I bet, yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I wonder, we just get these new revelations of these right-wing pundits being bought off by Russian propagandists. We get the Russian investigation when Trump first came into presidency. Is this a tactic of Russia to kind of have a softening view of the American people so that they can infiltrate Ukraine and Belarus and move slowly through the old Eastern Bloc? That's kind of what I think, because every other place, as Mr. Beat said, let's go bomb them. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah, I mean,
seems to be our soft spot.
It's almost like the two opposite ends of a magnet coming up, right? We are attracted, right, to war everywhere else, and then when it comes to Russia, we get there and it repels, and we just kind of we back away. And I yeah, I'm in the same boat as you guys. I have no explanations for it, other than I don't want to go, I don't know, but like you go back to last night, with the debate, one of the last questions, do you want to see Ukraine win the war? Couldn't answer it. and there's this strange, there's just in the conservative, the GOP as it stands today in the United States, which we all know is not the GOP of 10 years ago, of 12, 20 years ago. It's just got this weird stance on Russia, and I can't quite put my finger on it, other than I don't know if there's some sort of, want to impress Putin or not. I'm not really sure what it is, but there's a lot of it goes back to earlier in the Trump administration, where there was this weird, the whole situation with the weapons going to Ukraine in the beginning, of Trump's administration. It's just a strange thing, and things got a little bit clearer as time went on. But yeah, I don't really have an answer for you as well, other than, as Mr. Beat had said, it just seems very disjointed and doesn't make much
Yeah.
sense. It doesn't seem to be consistent with policy regarding other countries. I mean, even as you guys mentioned too, with China, which is way bigger and way more powerful. It doesn't seem consistent to me. Something seems off. It just seems off to me.
Yeah, I will say that it's still mostly neoconservative in terms of like, if you read about NATO, they're okay with NATO. Like they want to keep NATO. In fact, they talk about building up nuclear weapons for member nations. So it really is just it's like it doesn't. It slightly goes away from interventionism, meaning like, we should stay out of wars, but it's not all the way over to isolationism. Or I even hate that word isolationism. I think it's impossible to be isolationist and have any success as a country these days.
Yeah.
I mean, the only truly isolationist country, in my opinion, is North Korea. And we're seeing how that's gone for them the last few decades.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, I don't even know what you call it. What in terms of this new foreign policy, it is mostly though kind of the same. But yeah, that's a red flag. Maybe pun intended, of like the fact that Russia's
Pick that
always
up.
Russia. Like, I mean, Brandon, you brought up the those YouTube influencers who we apparently they were being paid by Russia to spread Russian propaganda. That's a big freaking deal.
It's
Hard.
huge.
Like, I mean, if we're trying to look at this objectively, I mean, we still got to bring that up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still also like, I believe I read somewhere that there was some guy tied to Russia who was one of the main writers of Project 2025. I could be wrong on this, but
I'll try to research that.
maybe you can, fact check me later on that. But I don't know. It just it's clearly the Heritage Foundation has adjusted according to Trump. One guy has just completely deviated the path the Heritage Foundation was on before, which was just all about neoconservatism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at it as well too, right? When we look at the different pillars, and we see the personnel, and the firing of certain personnel and civil servants and things of that nature, and it's easily going to spread up the ladder, right? And we're going to see, right, that sort of was that Schedule F, and the replacement of career civil servants, that can absolutely have a major impact on places around the world as well, and our standing and the way that we communicate with other countries as well. And if we're if career civil servants are now going to be replaced with individuals who will show fealty and loyalty, right, to what the incoming, and if a new, whatever the new incoming administration is going to be, right, that is certainly going to have an effect on our relations with foreign, our foreign policy, and our relations with foreign countries as well. So to kind of keep an eye on that, that's going to be very interesting, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, Smith, because they actually said ambassadors who aren't in line with the administration's views would be pulled.
Yeah.
And maybe not replaced. The State Department would be replaced with people that have fealty towards the administration. So,
yeah. And they talk about on day one, on inauguration day, 2025 recommends reassigning non-essential National Security Council staff to their home agencies. And yeah, exactly like you just said, they pull out individuals that are not going to show the significant loyalty to the new incoming president that is desired, right? And so the effects of that is something that could only be speculated because we've never really seen something like that before.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
you know,
And it's not mentioned in the document of Project 2025, but writers of the document have not ruled out barring promotions within the military of people who aren't in line with the administration's policies. So,
well, it does recommend that the White House review all senior military generals, and maybe possibly flag any officer promotions or something, right? To anybody who does not necessarily align, just kind of keep an eye, I guess, on certain individuals in the chain of command, which is terrifying. I mean that's to me that's that all goes along with autocratic, type of domination of government from within.
it's filtering all these decisions of international decisions through the executive branch. It's removing Congress.
It's very weird though, because a lot of, listen, I believe like conservatives are supposed to have a conservative view of the Constitution. Liberals obviously have a liberal view of it, meaning that it's expansive. Conservatives want it followed by the word of the document.
Loose constructionism, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
So the problem is though that Republicans shouldn't want a power through the executive, right? Like they should want limited government and more states' rights versus this is very different from all that stuff.
What happened to small government?
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is like government. I'm not saying that like this is all conservatives, by the way, but like this is saying, this version of it is saying that we're going to basically fold a lot of departments together. We're going to make sure there's fealty to it. And we're going to put everything through one man, and I mean, you do see this going on sort of in other countries, I guess you could say in some way, which we're going to bring up later. But yeah, it's very strange. Like Mr. Beats hitting on it, right? Like I used to think, Reagan's very different from, they preached the choir of Reagan, but Reagan was a much different man than these Republicans are.
Absolutely.
He was just obviously the Russia thing. I mean, to ever think in my lifetime that I would hear conservatives say like, well, Russia, hold on, Russia's okay. Like,
yeah, it's amazing.
They're just trying to get their empire back.
That's mind blowing. Absolutely mind blowing.
I've literally had conversations with lifelong Republicans who have gone MAGA saying, Russia's our friend. Why would we want to stop them? And you're going,
yeah.
Oh, where did these people come from? I don't understand.
I think Mr. B was saying before, it's amazing because it's really one guy who started that. They just jumped on it, right? I mean, it's kind of wild when you think about it.
You got to have respect for Trump in that regard, that he is a leader. But then on the flip side, you got to be like, all these people that are leeching onto his power, who are going against their own values just for their own power. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a respect for history down the line, because you figure history is going to see them wrong. I guess if it works out the way it should.
Right. And a happy ending of the book, right?
Depends who's writing history.
But don't quote me on anybody who's. But does anybody who's really,
living history?
Well, does anybody who's really kind of grabbing for that power, right? Doing exactly what you said, right? Folding over for power now. Are they ever really thinking about down the line though? Right? Is that ever? They're never. It's never about the long game for them. It's about, I want the power and I want it now.
Yeah.
And we'll deal with the future later on when we get there.
Right. They always have exit plans.
Right.
Oh, I never really was that loyal to him anyway. When he does lose power, which he's going to, because he's going to die probably within a few years.
Who was the first Spicer Sean Spicer.
Sean
Yeah.
Spicer.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
exactly what he did. I didn't really believe what I was saying.
Just hide behind as he hid
and
behind the
that's-
bush.
I mean, I guess that's one thing that gives me hope is, and sorry to derail this a little bit, Jay, but like the fact that sure, Project 2025 is like all indications are that it's all about loyalty. All these political appointees are like going to be supposedly loyal to the president, but really, are they? I mean, I even have questions about JD Vance. Like, I don't think he believes most of what he says. I
That's a
think he's
power
just,
grab. That's
yeah,
a power grab.
totally, totally. Like he's just
He
saying
called him
exactly what
Hitler.
Trump wants to hear. Yeah,
He's a Republican who called him the American Hitler, and then when he was
Yeah.
up for an election, he's like, I'll kiss
I
the
could
ring.
I could see JD Vance like if Trump was elected, I could see Vance be like, all right, when are we gonna enact 25th Amendment here? You know,
Right.
you know, like
Yeah.
you'd be the one to initiate that. So anyway,
I don't like all those divorces, Donald. You know who you made me think of when you said Sean Spicer, another guy who kind of traded his loyalty real quick was the guy who replaced Spicer, Scaramucci, Anthony
Scaramucci.
Oh, yeah.
Scaramucci.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
lasted
yeah.
his tenure in
5
2017 was
days?
it's I think 11.
11.
Now
Yeah,
that's
I kind of
people-
forget what he said, but I've
Well,
heard him on podcasts just ripping Trump like the whole
he said
way.
everything basically.
people now they measure the amount of time that while Trump's administration was still going on, they measure the amount of time that people held their position by Scaramucci's now. So, he made it about 8 Scaramucci's. So, I mean, it's insane, right? That came across, but you're right though. But that also, again, kind of derailing off the subject there. But it's something that was brought up in the debate last night was the amount of people that used to work for the administration that are now completely against it. It's just an interesting dichotomy. It's certainly an interesting aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting.
Only the best people.
That's
Only
it.
But I was waiting for them to say like Kamala to be like when he said about hiring and firing people, I would have been like, well, you only hire the best, I thought.
yeah.
But she was good
Waiting
enough. I
for
mean,
it.
she really
Yeah.
was like she
And
was funny.
She did get set up about for it when Trump says you haven't fired anybody.
Yes, exactly. That's
It's like,
what-
yeah,
that's a
'cause-
good thing because I hire good people.
Yeah.
I was
yeah.
waiting for that one too. Yeah, absolutely. Well, nobody fact checked her. I don't know because maybe she didn't
Yeah,
lie.
that's the first thing my dad must have been watching Fox News because he came upstairs and he's like, yeah, she won the debate, but like they kept fact checking. And I was like, dude, they fact checked him like 3 times on the most ridiculous stuff you could say. Like he's talking about dogs getting eaten. He was talking about the election being stolen and like
Babies being executed.
Yeah, I mean,
nowhere in any state in the United States is it illegal to murder babies, sir.
And
Like
he
that
was
was
like-
really said during a presidential debate. Like
he's
that's
like,
the
I
world
guess
we're
you're
living
right. I was like, all he had to do was not lie there.
And that's
And he
being
wouldn't-
fact checked.
Yeah, and but like, there was a million other lies that they just skipped over, but whatever.
Oh, well, yeah.
But whatever. I'm not going to put that part in here. Just to bring it back. So, but they do talk about maybe arming NATO a little bit. There's not a lot of talk in there in Project 2025, but Russia does play, a particular role in our alliance with NATO. So
Sure.
it is an effect on the NATO, what we have between NATO and the EU and us. There is an effect. I mean, if he can just roll through, well, I think he would have already if he could, but if we stop arming them and he's sitting in Kiev, I mean, he's staring at Poland and all these other countries. Now I know they're entering the NATO, but if they see the United States is more isolationist and more nationalistic, I mean, it does open the door for some more stuff because ultimately Putin wants empire.
Yeah, I read it as a way as it could be detrimental if the US is not fully present or doesn't care with the implementation of Project 2025. So is it really going to support Article 5 and back its allies, or is it just going to go, yeah, it's not the right time. Here's some money, here's some tanks, or is it going to go full bore, or is it just going to go, yeah, we're not doing that.
Well, I would figure Poland and the Baltic states are going to start because they're highly dependent on us already for support, are going to start looking for alternative arrangements at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the United States, our biggest card in that situation over there is deterrence, right? That's one of the
Mhm.
biggest roles that we play is deterrence. And if we can't be counted on to be, right, that's that singular force of deterrence against, any further aggression of NATO allies, that certainly, creates an atmosphere of distrust, and that's, I mean, if you what is the most important currency, in an alliance is trust. And if your trust is eroded, that's a significant blow. That is certainly a significant blow to, something that's supposed to be a peacekeeping force, and particularly a force that's right now essentially, very close to the front lines, of war in the European theater, which is, you know, it's a scary thing, you know.
I've heard it said before, though, that really Europe and the world is always a little weary of us, and not because of the past, but because of the present. Whatever administration gets in has changed the rules. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's an executive order, right? Um, we stopped sanctioning Iran. We made deal with them, and then Trump put it back, and then Biden put it back. There's like a schizophrenia to this that the world sees, it's and they from what they've said, it's like, can you trust America? Because it's not just like, oh, we like Joe Biden or we like this guy or that guy. It's like whoever gets voted in is the one holding the cards.
Yeah,
And
it's one of the downfalls of having someone there just at the longest 8 years, unless you're
yeah,
Yeah.
FDR, um but in, but in modern politics, that is kind of a tricky thing. Like, how do you have these lifelong partnerships or generational partnerships with countries where you're like, I may be gone in 4 years, but trust us. It's like,
Wasn't a problem until Trump. I mean, because again, for 35, 40 years, it was the same foreign policy, no matter what the political party. You had the Pentagon was getting the money it needed, the resources it needed to do what it needed to do. Yeah, Iran was definitely, I think, a big, which is another inconsistent thing. Like
Mm.
we're gonna cozy up to Russia, but then like turn around and give a middle finger to Iran. Okay, well, if the goal is world peace here, like we got to work, like you're just not consistent.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we have to be all buddy buddy with Iran. It just means like, hey,
right.
sometimes you got to compromise.
Well, it's interesting too, because when the Project 2025, yeah, as you stated, it's definitely more confrontational towards Iran, 100%. And it's interesting because it kind of, builds upon the Abraham Accords, but it leaves out the Palestinian people completely. They don't talk about, any sort of sovereignty, right, for or dignity or anything for the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to ignore one of the root causes, right, of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we know Iran will then take advantage of, right, and then only kind of benefit them and their proxy and initiatives over there, and then it's just going to continue, the ball. And then if we're taking a more confrontational stance, we're just setting ourselves up for more of a, potential, firefight with Iran down the line anyway. It's like
Yeah.
we're poking the bear there.
Yeah. It was one of the reasons that, well, I said it before, we'll focus on Russia because I know what's going to happen with a conservative ministry. At least we know what Trump's going to do when it
Sure.
comes to Netanyahu. He's going to tell him just wipe it out. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Wipe it out and put, hotels there, whatever you want to do. You're right. There's no focus on, but that's the thought process of solving that problem. So,
Yeah.
but to move it along a little bit here, Brandon, I'm going to look to you just on maybe some global political trends that you see that might be happening.
yeah. So kind of reflecting the political environment of the United States, it is happening around the world. One that stands out is Brazil and the ex-president Bolsonaro, who you can very much tell was trying to be Brazil's Trump. He literally insulted the Supreme Court after they issued an investigation of him. He continued to do it after, let's see, Supreme Court Justice Moraes ordered an investigation into whether President Bolsonaro's baseless electoral fraud claims. And where have we heard that before? In the United States, it's not from the Supreme Court because Trump was able to appoint 3 justices, but it's the same vein. It's the same thread of election denial, a witch hunt, people out to get them. And so as a government and a movement, it's a little different, but you still have that Trump figure, even though he's ex-president now.
Yeah. I mean, there's a focus that's probably in Project 2025 too. Like I mean, there's a deregulation, they're cutting environmental protections. It's definitely got that, like you said, he is the Brazil's Trump. I think it's like was it Brazil first over there or something like that? So it's,
yeah,
it's a national, it's
Sure.
It's funny because we use populism now as kind of like a bad word, but it wasn't always in the beginning, right? I mean, populism used to kind of be a good thing, but it's like a nationalistic populism that these guys tend to exploit.
Sure.
Demagogues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost a false populism.
Yeah, that's essentially what demagogues do. They recognize the populist outcry, but in response, they just kind of use it to their advantage.
Sure.
instead of
They manipulate it.
yeah.
And Bolsonaro is a typical example of it. So he threatened to respond with actions not within the bounds of the Constitution. And where have we heard that before?
Yeah.
Suspending the Constitution for 1 day. I mean, that was Trump's literal words. And here we have someone in Brazil saying the same thing because it's false populism.
Yeah. So it might be like a foreshadowing of what you see to come. You know what I mean? Like it's trying to dismantle state agencies and distance yourself from what the Constitution is and stuff like that.
Sure. Well, I mean, especially if it succeeds, right? If
Right.
Project 2025 succeeds in its goals, we're going to see a massive wave in countries, right, that have been sort of infiltrated by this false populism. It's going to have a roadmap. It's going to show exactly how to do it. And, if it can happen in the American democracy, then it's game on. It's game on, and that's open season everywhere. And that's that at least that's how I see it. If it succeeds, then that wave becomes bigger, and I think people get a little more ballsier. And again, like I said, there's a roadmap, right, to that success.
Yeah, that was one of the notes I actually had later on. It was like, you'll just see the guys who are already trying it. They're going to be much more emboldened if the United States can do something like that.
Sure.
And it's a natural, I think, consequence of. It's the problem when the United States goes inward, right? I mean, it's almost like a protection for themselves, right? Well, we better handle. We're going to do it our way too, type of deal. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
the United States is always the, at least since the beginning of the Cold War, after World War II and stuff. We've generally been the world. I guess you could call us the world police,
Sure.
in some way, whether we were on the good side or not.
You say it goes back even further, right? It goes back to the Monroe Doctrine, right? I mean, going over to the east, to taking over, right, the Western Hemisphere, right? So we've kind of that's been in our DNA for quite some time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's France kind of staved off that right wing surge that seemed to be coming with Le Pen, and then I mean her platform is basically the same thing. It's anti-immigration, it's nationalism, EU skepticism and stuff.
That's where I was going to go with next was France. and I kind of view them as a kind of ultra right wing light because they're not so extreme on everything. So, like, yeah, they had the Euroscepticism, but they don't quite want to leave the EU, but they want their own currency back. They want the franc back. Climate change, again, they don't, for some reason, they want nuclear and hydro, but they really hate wind for some reason.
It gives you cancer.
Yes. Yeah. Well, she said
Think about the birds.
The birds, yeah. It was kind of a very French response that she gave, that it spoils the landscape and spoils the beautiful
lot of NIMBY
aesthetics.
Aesthetics, yes.
Yes.
That's a good way to put it. Which kind of threw me off a little bit. I was like, huh, that's I haven't heard the right wing talk about it like that before. But again, they're very hardline immigration, and they want to not even give welfare to immigrants at all. They want to almost have a separate state for immigrants and the natural, I do that in air quotes, French population. So again, they're soft on certain things. She doesn't want to leave the Paris climate deal, which again, she's soft on that aspect, but incredibly hardline on Islam and immigrants.
That I was going to say, that's really what at the root of all these far right groups, populist groups. It's the in group, out group, the immigrants. It's always the immigrants.
What was this?
And when we always assume that the worst racists are here in the United States of America, I would argue that's not the case. Like I some of the most horrific racist comments I've ever got on underneath my videos. I follow some of these people, like, oh, I'm curious, like, who are these people? A lot of them are Europeans. A lot of them. You would be surprised. The death threats that I've gotten for some of my videos on racism. Europeans. Yeah. I've gotten death threats.
You know, it's something. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if you follow soccer, but you know, there is a ton of instances where, you know, soccer players from different nations that just aren't white are mocked in a way, man, that like we saw, you know, in the 1950s, you know, towards black baseball players coming in, right, and breaking the race barriers, and we're seeing that now. And it's insane, some of the things that, you know, at sports competitions that are said. Yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely right. You know, something that flies under the radar.
Especially Muslims, though. Muslims, that's the big one. We saw that in the UK. We're seeing that. You're probably going to bring up Germany here in a little bit.
The next one, Mr. B.
Yep.
There it is.
But go back to your point of soccer, Smith, is that there's a right-wing movement in soccer hooliganism where these people come together through soccer and form these right-wing ultra-nationalist movements, and then they go fight immigrants, and then they fight each other as well too. But
that's the gateway in is soccer.
Yeah.
Or as they call it, I guess they call it football. I don't know.
Football,
the football. But you see that especially in the Netherlands, France, Denmark, Germany, Poland, like that core European mass right there. That's where these parties come from, is this ultra violent take on sports, which is weird thing to say.
Which in Europe is violent enough as it is, right? And now you mix racism and beer into it, and it's just it's crazy.
Pour alcohol on the top of it, and
sure,
what happens.
Not to make light of it, but it's insane. You know, absolutely.
It is always weird though. So I always wonder, like, is Europe more racist than America? Because this stuff I read almost makes it seem like, not that they're segregated, but like, all right, so I believe, like, I once read a statistic that if there's like 15% Muslim population in France, it's like 50% are unemployed and like huddled to a certain section of it. You know what I mean? And I just remember the historian Joseph Ellis, writer of like 10 books on U.S. history, mostly in the colonial era. But I'll hear him talk about, we are the biggest experiment in a multiracial country. Meaning that, like, so he would talk about, like, on podcasts and stuff like that, on some of these other historians, how it was almost like unheard of, especially with slavery. I mean, Jefferson wanted to just get more land, like send them back or give them in our own space. And even Lincoln early on, like had a plan to send them back
Yeah, yeah, he was
home,
that was it.
to
That was his big plan. Frederick Douglass ripped him apart for it.
yeah. And then he met Frederick Douglass and I think there was 5 of them or whatever. I forget what they called themselves, but yeah, they kind of talked him out of it. But that was the plan, like to just, you know, like they weren't generations of black people weren't here building the country before that. So that's a long way to ask, I guess, if Europe's more racist than America.
You hate to even answer that question because it's hard to measure something.
Sure,
like
yeah.
that,
Especially
but
some I don't live, it's
I do know that race as a concept, which of course is it's a social construct, but regardless, we did create it. It's there, but it's always been more pervasive. I think something in the United States, meaning it's something we always think about. Like we haven't been able to like just pretend like we have a colorblind society, whereas in Europe they've been able to kind of like for example in Germany you don't even fill out when you fill out forms. They a lot of times like when I'm talking about like government forms, they don't ask you what your race is.
yeah.
It's not like something they think about all the time. Where we're always thinking about it here. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but that's like definitely something that's different.
Yeah, and it makes sense. A lot of the focus over there is nationalism or
Yeah.
nationality. You know what I mean? Which makes sense with the amount of countries that are so close to each other, right? But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the idea of the racial construct was certainly, it's deeply embedded in the American DNA. Whereas in the European nations, yeah, that nationality was something that was that real determiner of mirth in people's eyes for sure.
Which is odd, considering the history of Europe, where it was kind of there were no nations. It was just principalities,
states and
like
yeah.
Until the
cities.
1800s. Yeah, 1800s.
Right,
Like, although
1848, yeah.
another thing, I mean, for centuries, of course, religion was the glue that kept Europe together until the Protestant Reformation, of course, and then ever since. But now, actually, Europe is, I hate to generalize, but generally more secular than the United States. So maybe that's another reason why, because you got an increase of Muslim immigrants to these countries that are religious. So maybe that's another element that is part of the reason what this led to this rise in xenophobia.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It definitely in this country though, immigrants have always been the scapegoat. Like since I think we talked about it in one of the episodes, since like the 1820, after the first generation.
Since forever, yeah, but even before that though, I mean, you look at the Alien and Sedition Acts, right? They were specifically the Alien Acts were targeted specifically at immigrants, right? I mean,
true.
and Adams was, really going after a lot of the French immigrants at that time, but I think it's something that we also see whenever there is periods of mass immigration or an emigration at the same time, that countries that are receiving, right, a lot of the immigrants, there's a huge lashing back at the new crowds of people that are coming in. And right now, as we said, there's a massive influx in Muslim immigrants going into Europe. So seeing that them lashing back is not surprising, because you look at the 1840s, like you were just mentioning, right? And you get the Irish, right? And the Germans coming in, the Irish and the Germans in the 1840s into the late 19th century. It's that same, lashing out, right, at these new groups of people that are coming in. And it's just, I don't know, maybe it's a human characteristic, right? Because it doesn't seem to matter where in the world you see it, but when you have that mass immigration, right, there's that pushback from a certain core of nationalists that can't stand it and can't accept it.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up on 2 points real quick. First, I'm going to go with you, Smith. I think that is a very human thing to do. It's a very tribal thing to do. You're not one of us. Like, point. Are you a threat? Are you going to mess this up? I do think it's something ingrained in us and something that we have to kind of think to get over. We have to double check ourselves in a way to kind of like, am I just acting out because I fear change kind of thing.
Sure.
And the other thing was, I was going to go back to Mr. Beat's point about religion. The stark difference that I saw between the US right wing and the European right wing was religion. The US right wing was adamantly Christian, where in Europe it's not necessarily so. They don't focus so much on Christianity. They tend to be overwhelmingly Christian, but it's not their core focus. Nationalism is more of a focus than Christianity, where the American right wing seems to be one nation under God kind of thing. That was a point.
What's the name of the Doctors Association? I know that's random, but it's going to go into a point. I can't remember what their name is. But anyway, I was going to say immigration played a huge role in abortion back in the 1860s. I remember doing a whole dive on this because I was going to do something on it, and then I never did. But at one point, it wasn't like this totally illegal thing to have an abortion in America, right? It was like between a doctor and whoever. It's just like a lot of places had like a certain length of time that they could do it. But there was one guy, Horatio Robinson Storer. He started an effort to criminalize abortion. And one of the things that was said was that while all these immigrants, Mexicans and Asians that were coming in and changing the culture, we had basically white women who weren't willing to breed enough. That's a part of what it was. I mean, there's obviously other movements involved, but that's a big part of it that never gets talked about. I don't have all my notes on that. Oh, the AMA, the American Medical Association. He started that, or he was one of the early guys, and he made it the AMA's mission to basically start this to become the undisputed leader in the effort to criminalize abortion. I'm not going to get too deep into that because I don't have my notes or anything.
Crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like a story of a podcast.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Put it on the list.
I had that. I was actually going to do like a thing on it for my show, and then I just felt kind of weird. Everybody was doing something on abortion, and I was like, it feels like a clinger. You know what I mean? Like you're using it. I don't know. So I just didn't do it.
Wait, it'll simmer down and then it'll pop back up, and then bring it on the story up. We'll do it over there.
I'll send you guys a copy of some of the stuff I read. There was a lot in there, but I just remember specifically a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric involved in there. So,
does that tie in with the Great Replacement theory? Kind of combating.
I think it is during that same time.
Mm.
I don't think Storer was necessarily involved in that, but there was a lot of people who agreed with him who were involved with that whole thing.
Okay.
It's a very interesting story and something that nobody ever talks about. So, you know what I did want to bring up, or maybe Brandon, you had something on it. I wanted to talk about the recent successes of the I'll try to say their name in their native language.
I would
Alternative für Deutschland. I don't know if I said that right. I don't think
Alternative für Deutschland. Yeah, there you go. That's close enough.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mr. Beat might have a lot of German listeners. I have no clue, but I don't. So, but yeah, that would be the AfD, which is the Alternative for Germany.
Yeah. So the Alternative for Germany is probably one of the more dynamic of the parties I've seen, because they kind of started not centrist of right, but then they started to faction a lot. So, and then I don't know how to quite explain this. So think of them as the American Tea Party.
Okay.
That's how they had this little grassroots populist ideas. They were very,
it's rural. It's more rural.
It's very rural.
Yeah.
And it's very much in the East.
Yeah.
Eastern. Yeah. So one of the things was, as we all know, you had West Germany, you had East Germany. So the fall of the Soviet Union, you had West Germany kind of the predominant economic power, and you had East Germans trying to keep up and trying to integrate with them instead of them integrating together, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they felt like a little left behind, a little kind of like everyone thought they were a backwater. It'd be like Mississippi, Louisiana trying to integrate with Massachusetts, New York.
Mhm.
It's that kind of dynamic. So they started getting a little more contentious, a little more frustrated, a little more sympathetic with the old ways. And then it starts to fracture. You start to get different parts of the party wanting to go more right wing. And again, we have that immigration coming straight through and the good old racism, and anti-Semitism was rife.
Yeah.
They started to sympathize with Holocaust deniers. They started to say that the Holocaust was Western propaganda. And they started to say that we need a strong man for this country.
So it
Which
comes
you know,
down to the strong man.
East Germans love those strong men. You
Yeah.
know,
We need a daddy.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's definitely the propensity towards that type of
Yeah,
autocratic.
that was definitely one of the scarier things I saw. Like a
Yeah.
headline saying like Germany's
go
right
again.
wing party wins
Yeah.
for the first time
Yeah.
since
That always
Slowly,
roll
yeah, when they
call.
and they slowly start picking up parliamentary seats, and it's like, oh no,
Mhm.
no,
Yeah.
no, no, no,
Ne-
no, no, no,
Never
no, no,
win
no.
more than 32% of the vote.
What are we doing here? So we're not doing this again, are we? Right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
They always raise the
2017,
shackles.
right? Yeah,
Well,
right. Yeah, that's like, I know I use this word quite a bit, but it's terrifying and horrifying when you
But
see
like
those headlines and those numbers.
it is because the times are kind of scary right now, right? You got a lot of economic instability in the world.
Yeah.
You have Elon Musk, I read yesterday, is on pace, if everything still goes right with his stock, to be the first trillionaire in 2027.
Yeah.
Which is insane to me. And then there'll be 3 more by 2028. Meanwhile, the rank and file have to worry about things like inflation and stuff like that. Inflation helps these guys. But, it goes into that. We were talking a little bit about populism. I guess I'll ask you guys, does populism breed fascism or the strong man?
I think that's a little
Or-
too presumptive, but
Or
Yeah, I
is
don't know
it-
if it breeds, but I think it certainly could potentially set a stage.
yeah.
I think you're right. Because when I think about it, right, what the 1890s was when we had really like a populist uprising here,
Yeah.
and probably, but I think about those times, and you have, the Russians eventually had what in 1917 became the Soviet Union, right? Lenin took over. I don't know if they had the same kind of populism there that led to that. I guess like populism's a weird thing to me because it's on the surface to me a good thing, but I feel like it could go any way. I think the natural inclination of people, right, is to it's really difficult to understand the issues, even when you try to understand them. It's much
Sure.
easier for a guy to come in and say, I could just fix it.
Well, yeah, and also so at the root of the problem is always, scarcity. If people feel like they're desperate, they're struggling, and democratically they're not getting their needs met, like they're voting for politicians and the politicians are not responding to the needs of the people, then at a certain point, the people are going to be like, well, why are we doing democracy anymore? Let's just get the strong man in there who's just going to get stuff done. That's why
That's why
famously,
fascism was popular. It was
I mean,
new. We didn't know anything about
yeah,
it in
like-
the 30s.
Oh yeah,
But
it seemed as if it was a solution.
there was
you
a
know,
lot of
to-
Americans who like Nazism and
Sure,
and
absolutely.
fascism in Italy because they're suffering through the Great Depression and they're watching, Hitler they go to the Olympics with all this, it
Sure,
just
yeah, man.
mechanized everything.
1936 Man of the Year,
Yep.
and so you look at like that first the Wall Street coup, right? That we did on my show.
Right.
yeah.
And we mentioned the same thing. It was to a lot of people, it seemed as if it was a solution. and having the luxury of hindsight, it's like, oh, but yeah, it could potentially go that, but it could go the opposite route as well, right?
Right.
We've got some very, very popular, I mean, I make the argument that Bernie Sanders is also, a populist as well, right? He's got certainly populist messages, right? But and I know a lot of people make the argument that Sanders and Trump are in the same boat. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. But they certainly use populism to a certain extent to further their message. I feel like they go opposite ways. But yeah, I mean, populism can, it opens the door to really inject yourself into the veins of people who are hurting and who are desperate. And when people are hurting and desperate, they sometimes will make decisions and allow someone to follow them maybe to a place they wouldn't normally go if times were okay. And we always see, with the rise of populism, there's always economic strife right there.
Yes.
And it's exactly what Mr. B had said, is it's when people are hurting and they're hurting in their pockets, and it's that I alone can save this, I alone can fix this. Well, then, yeah, what's the point? What do we need democracy for? We're all getting kicked in the teeth every day. If this guy says he can fix it, then let's just go. Let's just do it, because I'm tired of
Yeah.
this poverty for my family.
You've been
Yeah.
going to the doctor and the doctor's not healing you. And so like, well, fine, I'm going to try this snake oil salesman.
Sure.
Because like the doctor hasn't been helping. Well, the doctor will help you if you like just be patient and you just keep going and keep following. It takes time. I'm not patient enough. I want help now. I'm going with the snake oil salesman.
Exactly. And it's yeah, it's absolutely, it's those certain, that's it.
Democracy.
Yeah, those
It's
certain
messy.
ingredients, absolutely, along, sometimes with, unchecked capitalism,
I was going to say
and
it's a mixture of the two.
sure,
Democracy
and
moves too slow, capitalism rips everything away, right? Like,
sure.
and gives it to a certain class.
Yeah, I mean, going back to William Jennings Bryan, I mean, we see it, for quite some time in United States history, and yeah, I think that it's that it just happens, and it just it seems almost cyclical,
Yeah.
where, and again, it very, very, very strongly attached to economic strife for sure, which comes along with war, which comes along with worry, which comes along with resources, and exactly what, like Mr. Beat said, scarcity. If I'm not getting what I believe to be my piece of the pie, and I see other people who don't look like me, and I feel like they're getting my piece of the pie, right? That's when somebody can certainly tap into that nationalistic portion, right, of populism for sure, and creates that us versus them.
Yeah. The U.S. Revolution, the American Revolution, could be seen as a populist movement.
Well, yeah,
Sure.
that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
I always think like though, communism or any kind of, well, for state, it's like, it's people coming together and trying to figure out a better way to move forward, right? Or all right. So me and Danny might cover some of this, but we were
Sure.
going to talk about some historical, not exactly the same, but like in that light where it was a big change. So like I would bring up, okay, Sweden in the 30s, right?
Yeah.
Sweden formed the welfare state in the 1930s. They were a constitutional monarchy. They had a parliamentary system, but that was dominated by the upper classes and conservative elite. There was a lot of elitism, and people right now are really angry with the elite. It can go certain ways. With them, they became a social democracy. Right? They turned it into a welfare state in the 30s just because of the economic challenges of the time. They had the Great Depression, obviously, and the downturn. Like everybody else, Sweden suffered rising unemployment, poverty, social unrest, whatever you have. So the SAP, the Swedish Social Democratic Party advanced, and I believe that was in 1932.
Say it in Swedish.
I dare you.
I don't have that written out. I just had I love that you were like, don't try it. I do have, though, what their government promoted, which was the idea. Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Folkmat.
Welcome.
which is the idea of a people's home.
Yes. Yeah, that's what they called it.
Right.
Yeah, that was their social welfare state. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just promoting like social solidarity and stuff like that. Obviously, that's different to Project 2025, but I just saw like a rationality between saying like this is a transformation that expands government influence, right? Like a comprehensive government reform in some way. That I try to focus on peaceful transfers
Sure.
and stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Peaceful transfers of power and stuff like that. But I
I
thought that
like it.
was
Well,
yeah.
I was looking into that stuff, and I have the trouble I have in the connection there is exactly what you said, though, the peaceful transfer. And when it's peaceful transfer, generally means the people are backing it,
Yeah.
and what we're seeing, well, though, with Project 2025 is so much pushback on it. And I think the very fact that it has been, I truly believe the individuals and the authors of 2025 really thought they were going to fly under the radar with it. I really think they genuinely believed that people were really not going to pay attention to it. And they were
I
just going to
agree.
kind of slyly kind of throw it right in there. And I think once the cat got out of the bag, I think that definitely threw a wrench in their
Yep.
plans on that.
But that's what the Heritage Foundation has done for
In their
40
MO.
something years since
Why
they
would it
got it.
continue to work? Yeah, exactly.
So what were they scared was going to happen? I like the way Mayor Pete put it. He goes, "Well, this was always policies that they had. They just put it in writing."
Sure.
Like that. That's the
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. And I think what they were afraid of, I think a lot of it is off of the ramifications and the public outcry of Roe v. Wade. I think once Roe got overturned and they saw how upset people got. And I think so much of that, I really feel like that wave, people rode that wave of anger and disbelief of Roe getting overturned and saw this as almost maybe a continuation of that, right? A continuation of the erosion of rights, and kind of feeding into different parts of American life.
So I'll throw in there as a guy who grew up in a conservative household that idolized Ronald Reagan, and I certainly held conservative ideals for a long time. And I would say I'm independent. If the right conservative came along, I would look at them because I do think I don't tie myself to a party anymore
Sure.
because the idea is that there are times where you need to maybe pull the reins of government back or pull, not spend as much, things like that, right? So I never thought the rationale, I think, in a conservative's mind who's a rational person, right, was like, that's never going to get overturned. I mean, that's what I used to think, right? I was like, they just run on Roe v. Wade. Nobody's actually going to do anything about it. And this was like the dog that caught its own tail. Because it was like, I don't think anybody really thought it was going to be overturned, but you put the right justices in and something happens.
I think there was
obviously nobody was prepared for it.
I think there was one man. I think there was one man that knew it was going to be overturned, and that man had planned for that to be overturned since Bork got borked in the early '80s, and that was McConnell. I think McConnell played the long game. That became
Do
his
you think he
life's
really wanted that
mission.
overturned though? Because at one time
Absolutely,
he was
100%,
pro-life. I mean, he was pro-choice in the
hundred
before
percent.
Ronald Reagan.
I
If you look
believe it
it
was
up.
100% because after Bork, right, got Robert Bork, right, was denied his seat on the Supreme Court, he went full slash and burn. I mean, he had a 40-year mission to now stack the court with individuals. And I mean, and that was his goal was to stack that court. And as that went forward, that coalition with the Christian right solidified throughout the '80s, going into the '90s
But he was,
with McConnell.
I view him as an opportunist because he
I,
he when he used to run, he changed a lot of positions from. I think he was started in the 70s.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
If you look at a lot of his positions back then, they changed. He hardened later on. And
sure.
I think, obviously he was pissed off about, you're right, I think, though, about Bork and he weaponized the courts, and no
But
doubt he
what could you
weaponized.
but you said it though. You said it yourself, right? They ran on Roe v. Wade getting overturned, right? So how can you galvanize? How can you galvanize the Christian right? What can you do? What kind of red meat can you dangle in front of them? Was the
Yeah,
overturning of Roe v. Wade. So look at just we're gonna overturn it, and then
but do you
eventually
think
it
he
goes.
wanted it overturned, or did he like
I
running on it?
No, no, no. I don't think he had any particular thoughts on abortion. I don't think he thought abortion was illegal. I think you're right, opportunist. And I think it was a way, right, to, help push through three very conservative judges that he knew. All right, now we're going to get this win. And how long after that did he pretty much, step away from the limelight? He got them
True,
in, it was overturned, and then McConnell just backed away. You know what I mean? He got
true.
certainly quieter. It seems as if he accomplished his mission and he was like, all right, boys, I'll see you back at home. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just my take on it.
No.
I
Yeah.
think he used it as absolutely as an opportunist, but I believe after Robert Bork, he said, there's a really great documentary about this. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But I show it to my AP Gov class, and it's a really interesting, and it traces McConnell and how outraged he was, and it goes through Clarence, Clarence Thomas, and how it was just it became all of the Senate hearings to confirm the confirmation hearings after Bork became bloodbaths.
Yeah.
It was normally you confirmed out of courtesy for the president, right? President wanted to confirm this person generally, but after
Yeah.
that it became bloodbaths, and I don't know. I just kind of feel like there was a mission
Yeah.
that
Oh, well, he
he had.
definitely had a mission. I mean, he bragged about how many court openings he left open for Obama, like that wouldn't go through because he
I
just,
think you're talking about the Frontline documentary, right?
Yes, yes,
It's a
exactly what I'm
good
talking
one.
about.
Yeah,
It's a
I
very
watched it
good
while
one.
doing it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they updated it. They just recently updated within the last couple of years. Yeah.
Oh,
he did
okay.
get
Yeah.
quiet. He did get quiet a few years ago. I mean, he was having strokes like every time he
Sure.
went on
Yeah, they hit
stage.
his off switch or his standby switch.
They're like, rest, friend.
Yes, you need to
But
recharge. It's been a long 40
I mean,
years.
he won't be the lead dog anymore come
No.
after this election. It's kind of
yeah.
crazy.
I don't know if anybody was more powerful by just saying no to everything than that man. Just
Yeah.
so
Supreme Revenge. That's the name of it. It was the Frontline PBS documentary, Supreme Revenge.
Nice. Yeah, I love
Yes,
Frontline.
yes, yeah, absolutely. McConnell's hard fought effort to transform the nation's highest court. Yes, absolutely. He after that, and whether it was necessarily about abortion or not, it was I'm going to turn the Supreme Court far right conservative. We're going to take over the courts because if you have the courts, you have a
yeah,
massive
he
amount of power.
he was a visionary in that sense, I guess. Not
Played the
in a
long
good
game.
way, but
No, but he played the long
he
game. We
saw
said for
where the
years.
power was. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
the
listen, this is a guy
Democrats
who
can't
never ran for president,
didn't
but
need
he
to.
obviously had a ton of power. He loved
Yeah,
the Senate. He owned the Senate.
right. There wasn't enough power in the presidency. You know what I mean?
Well,
He
you could
didn't,
stay
he
under
didn't
the
need it.
light, right? Like you could kind of hide. Oh, a long time
Yeah,
ago, you could probably hide more. And now, not as much, but
Yeah, you have to retire after your term limits.
yeah,
well, which
absolutely.
one? So, some of these examples, I know what you're saying. The reason why I chose, just to get back here,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
these precedents and peaceful types of revolutions, I guess, was because of, Kevin Roberts' phrase that blood that, this will be bloodless if
Let's the
the
left allows
liberals
it.
let
Yeah.
us have it. And we always talk about it being bloody at this point. So I just thought it was a different change. But I guess, I mean, I think you would think probably Thatcherism's a fair comparison to a government change, like, because that's in line with Reaganism,
Yeah.
right? Like,
I
so
thought it was interesting too that Thatcherism was built on four pillars. Which is
that's
I was
right.
like, wow, would you look at that, right? Commitment, it's free enterprise, nationalism, improving efficiency, right, and
Right.
their traditional values. So I was like, yeah, there's that common denominator of the four pillars again as well, which I thought was interesting. Um, And I mean, even your Thatcherism today, it depends on who you speak to. It depends on who you talk to, on what the effects were, whether it was good, whether it was bad. But it's certainly, I mean, it certainly made a massive, it changed England. I mean, fundamentally,
Well, it's the
to its
same as
core.
Reaganism. Like it
Sure.
depends on who you talk to, right?
100%.
Like
Yeah,
who is good
absolutely.
for and who it wasn't. I mean, the numbers are there, or whatever the numbers are, but it's whoever lived through it and who it affected in what
Yeah.
way that says it's good or bad. But
Yeah.
that one, that's go ahead.
I think Thatcherism was much more acute than
Mm.
Reaganism. Reaganism took time to develop, whereas Thatcherism, like, we're closing these coal plants now. We are changing now. You are losing your jobs now.
Sure.
We're busting these unions now. And it happened within, I say overnight, but the metaphorical overnight. It was just so hard, so fast, so quick, and it was just very extreme in that sense. Where Reaganism was like, let's keep pushing the envelope, push it, push it, push it, push it.
Sure.
And I think that's the difference between Reaganism and Thatcherism.
Well, too, I mean, Thatcher was what, 79 to 90, right? Which is not very far off from the years that Reagan was in there.
Mhm.
But when she left, I don't know if Thatcherism followed suit as much as Reaganism did into the early 90s a bit. You know what I mean? Like Reaganism was still sort of the ideal of the Republican Party for a while after Reagan, so
Yeah.
Yeah, she wasn't
definitely had time to
nearly as
marinate a little
revered
bit more.
as
Sure,
Reagan
absolutely.
is, or
I mean,
was and is.
she got a hell of a lot done in essentially the same amount of time that Reagan was in office. You're right. It was a hell of a lot of work that she got done. But I feel like Reaganism, even, that small little incremental as it went, I think that continued for a little bit further after that as well. Yeah.
Interesting thing when you read up on Reagan, though, he was very aware of public sentiment, which is one of the reasons the deficit blew up, right? Because if you're gonna cut spending, there's really three places to do it. You have to do it on Social Security and Medicare. You have to do it on the military. I guess those are the three places. I'm trying to think there might
those
be
are the
another.
big three.
But it's politically, it's suicide if you want to do that. I mean, it's political suicide. It's a problem the conservatives have all the time, honestly. Is like what ends up happening is you cut little nickel and dime programs in the long run that were helping people, right? You'll cut food stamps, you'll cut children's food programs at
Sure, yeah.
schools and shit like that.
Head Start programs.
Right. Which, by the way, like, he took note of all that stuff, what I read about it. Like, so when he cut the Head Start program, he said it was like an accident, some of it. He's like, no, and he kind of installed it back. He was very aware of it.
Sure.
And a lot of the people who love him were talking bad about him back then because of it. Like the really hard-headed conservatives.
Yeah.
Back then.
That's why libertarian membership continued to grow. The Libertarian Party during the 1980s is because they thought that he was spending too much money, even though that's Congress. But he approved of the budget.
Yep. Like he wanted
Yeah.
to get rid of. Well, we could talk about this. He wanted to get rid of the Department of Education. When he tried to do that, they found out that people liked the Department of Education, and there was an uproar about it. Obviously, Project 2025 has this in there. I feel like, though, the Department of Education has been like in the crosshairs.
Oh yeah.
For 40 years.
Yeah.
It's always something that's mentioned. I mean, Brandon, you brought it up. You've read some things about the books and stuff like that.
Yeah, from the 50s and 60s, where declaring the Department of Education unconstitutional.
Right. I mean, that's obviously one of the things they want to overhaul here.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing officially until the Carter administration, but it was part of the Department of what was it part of before that?
Yeah, it was
as a separate department. It wasn't a thing until 1979.
It was probably a Department of Agriculture because everything was in there.
Just throw it in there.
Did you ever look at that? Like what? What? Like what is that doing there?
Oh, it was. I think the
I know it
health,
definitely wasn't
health,
part of
education, and welfare.
health,
that's what it
education, and
was. Health,
welfare.
education,
Yeah.
welfare.
You,
Yeah.
yeah, it was in the
But I
U
do
part.
remember looking at the Department of Agriculture and being like, "What?" Some of the stuff. It's
How did they
very
get
interesting.
that?
Yeah.
It's like a crazy fantasy draft.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
What?
Well, listen, a lot of the stuff in here, we could go to the domestic and global ramifications. It harkens back to all that kind of stuff, right? There's deregulation, the climate policy,
Yep.
immigration, labor rights. I mean,
Yeah.
these will have ramifications at home.
Yeah.
And that's
I mean,
part of reducing the sectors of the federal government is the regulations.
there's the regulations and there's also the protections, right? And there's a lot of protections that are potentially being, lost as well. I mean, it's the very reason why unions exist in the first place, right? And so much of what the Department of Education does is it protects, students, and it protects different peoples with the Title IX and whatnot. And if that stuff is, if you're messing with the office for, civil rights, I mean, it's certainly putting a ton of Americans, students with disabilities, special education services, LGBTQ, students, it's putting people in potentially harm's way, and that's, something that is, certainly for me, and I know is, to parents and educators, right? That's certainly at the top of the list as well. And it's also interesting too, because, it's looking at that, the giving the schools, the states, right, complete control, and states now handing so much of that control over to parents. And now it's like, well, what does this look like? What does education look like? Which is a bit scary, that's, and I'm not saying that parents should not have a say in education. That's not what I'm saying. But I don't think the education system needs to kneel down and teach what parents are demanding. I think there are private schools in which, that course can be taken. But public schools for everybody, not just certain groups of people, I think so. The protections being potentially wiped out or messed with that's, something that scares me.
Yeah. Part of what they're looking at too is so I don't think they really go after the minimum wage, but they go after overtime pay rules, right? And they're basically giving employers more flexibility.
Yeah,
with that stuff.
They want to move from the 40-hour work week to the 180-day month. Is that
180 hour?
180 yeah, 180 sorry, day. 180
That's a
hour
long month.
Well, it's
that calendar is getting changed again.
The 180 hour month instead of, so you only have to pay overtime if you go over 180 hours within
it's like
month.
Yeah, through the month.
So you could work a literal 80-hour work week and not get any overtime because you're not working the next 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is,
I used to work at like ShopRite was my first job. And what they like to do is if you worked like 36 hours, I forget what it was, whatever, it wasn't 40 hours, but whatever was considered full time. Like if you worked a certain amount of hours for 6 weeks to them, you had to be a full-time employee, and you're, certain pay and certain benefits and stuff like that. So what they would do, it's essentially that. For 5 weeks, they'd work you like 39 hours, and then they give you a cut week of 14.
yeah.
But you're just a kid. You're like, whatever, I'll take the week.
Yeah. That sounds
I don't
great.
care. I don't care about any of that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, listen, the other thing is obviously the climate policy is going to have a huge effect. Basically going to roll back all the environmental regulations. They're going to want to dismantle or weaken whatever the EPA regulations are.
Get rid of the EPA.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a way to get to weaken him.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to weaken
Yeah.
him. But listen, that has effects globally, right? Because we're in the Paris Agreement for now.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can withdraw at any time. So again, it's one of those things. It's weird. Some of these issues, it's like they want no federal leadership, but they also give power to the executive on the federal level at a level not seen before. It's just like
Yeah.
everything's so contradictory that I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They want what they want to be enforced, but what they don't want to be enforced, they're like, you don't have to do that because it's small government.
This is
There's
what
no
I
principles
like.
here. There's no principles. It's about power.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's about setting up a structure that is going to help maintain that power, right? And that's really what the key is, right? I mean, it's one thing to get power, all right, that's great, but the next and most important question is how do we keep it? Because which is about as it's about as anti-American as it gets, right? I was just teaching today about some of the precedents of Washington, and the very fact that he did his 2 terms and he went home. It's like, all right, the people have to learn, right, how to adjust to new leadership. Otherwise, we're just going to find ourselves back where we were, and it goes against the very morals of that decision,
Yeah.
which is just, it's
Well,
not about keeping power. That's the antithesis of what was this experiment was meant to try to experiment. That's exactly what the
right.
experiment was.
Well, that's what's amazing about him is he literally gave up power twice, right? Like they won the revolution. And I think Mr. B, didn't you have him as #1 on your list of presidents, I think,
Yes,
right?
that's a
Because
big
of that,
reason
like
why.
yeah, which I would agree with because yeah, just what he set in place, right? Like he had to create basically all the norms, or at least the
Yeah.
first norms.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You look at
Yeah.
every other, almost every other democracy starting out. You had the first guy, and yeah, it's a guy. It's always a guy, not a gal.
Always a guy, yeah.
That's in power, and they're like, I like this power. I think I'm gonna just stick
Right.
around for the rest of my
This
life.
is comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, even
Do
to
it
this
more of
day, like,
this.
look at all the after the post-colonial in both Asia and Africa, all those post-colonial countries. A few of them worked out where the leader was like, okay, you can limit my power. I'm going to step down. But a lot of them, no, dictator for life. And it's just, even to this very day, we see that urge is not, it's in all of us, that urge to just have more power, especially the more you have, the more you want it.
Sure. I mean, you could see it in other revolutions. I mean, I think there were legitimate socialist revolutions that legit tried to fight for people and
Yes,
tried
I
to
agree.
fight for those lower classes. And then once that there's a couple of different factors you can argue that have played into it. That power dynamic is huge, right? And then you look at somebody like Castro, right? That was okay for the people, but Castro was never able to get past the revolution itself, right? Everything was based on the revolution. No, you need to acknowledge that it happened and now move on and set up an actual infrastructure, country in there. But
And the
again,
CIA.
yeah, that too, and it's exploding cigars. But the point being is, go bringing it back to Washington. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that it's setting up, not only is it setting up a system that will allow them to shape the United States exactly like you said, to be what they want it to be, which is generally not in any sort of consistent manner. It's just based on the whims of certain groups of people. But yeah, then it's creating that structure just to keep power in the hands of a certain few, right? And essentially create almost an oligarch, with no principles, none. There's no consistent principles behind it, like Mr. Beat said.
Yeah. And I mean, communism in a lot of ways it's Marxism is a weird thing because I don't know if people realize Karl Marx didn't run a country. You know what I mean? Like
Right?
they always
The
throw that
amount of
out there.
people that call him a dictator that killed millions of people. It's
Right.
like,
So I kind of
that's
love
what?
Mark. I kind of love Marx in the sense that he is a guy who like lived through, he watched the factories come in. He was a critique of capitalism and what was
Sure.
wrong with it. Um, it's just that the other guys who bought into it, decided to do it in a very non-peaceful sort of transition. But he was a guy who I'd look at him as he critiqued capitalism as the way he saw it, right? The factories, kids with black lung, um, and no offense, he hasn't been wrong in a lot of things about the ills of capitalism.
Yeah, the
On a lot of
problem
it.
is authoritarianism all along. The conflation of
Yes.
authoritarianism, totalitarianism with communism has been
Right.
just annoying the last 150 years. We need to get
Sure.
over that.
It's sort of
Right.
detrimental, yeah, to people's
Yeah, it's
health and
like
well-being. Like it's just hasn't
we
worked that
Yeah.
all
well.
we all agree that well, not all of us, but 95% of us agree that authoritarianism is bad.
Yeah.
Which is also why I think that bringing it back to Project 2025, I mean, it's just if you really read between the lines and even sometimes on the actual lines, you'll see that, maybe you are okay with authoritarianism to a certain degree, and that's troubling. Yeah.
I mean, there's been quite a few interviews that I've seen with individuals that have stated outright, I want authoritarianism. I
Yeah.
want a dictator. And that goes back to
True.
kind of what we were talking about before, are those, those special characteristics or the special ingredients, right? That when mixed together, people will willingly ask for that strong man to come in and fix all the problems. And and like that's the crazy part because and I don't mean this in any mean way, but those people can vote too, right? That's and voting blocks get big enough, right? That's scary as well. They'll voluntarily agree to live under an autocrat is beyond me. You know,
Yeah, but that's
it's
the problem of this is a problem we've always had in history, right? Generations forget. The
Mm,
people who lived through World War II taught their kids every day about World War II and the problems of fascism. I read an article from a guy, this is years ago now, who lived through, he was one of the, he was like in his 80s or whatever. I don't remember, but he was talking about, he did see a fascistic rise starting to happen in the world, not just the US, but the world. And he said the problem is that, like, you guys haven't lived through it. You guys never saw it. And every generation that comes along every 20 years
sure.
forgets a little bit more because there's nobody there to reinforce it unless you're really like a student of history.
Well,
Uh,
like Mr. Beat, I'm sure you can identify with this. Is if you ever tried to teach a group of students about um the what's the word I'm looking for about the importance of and how much 9/11 changed this country to a group of students who've never lived pre
yeah,
9/11, and I'm not putting them down, but they really can't understand it.
no,
And I was there today in a classroom trying to get the point across, and it's impossible. It's there's no way for them to comprehend it because
That's
you know
why,
go ahead.
sorry.
No,
That's
go
why,
ahead.
like, it's just so weird you guys are bringing this up because literally my video I'm releasing on Friday is about the last World War II veterans that are still alive because I was lucky to actually hang out with a couple of them
oh, that's cool.
this past summer, and it was just such an incredible experience to interview them and hear their wisdom and all that. But no, with 9/11, yeah, I had the same problem when I was in the classroom. And so that's why I would always frame it around myself, like because usually 3 weeks in to the course,
You're in there. Yep,
they
there
at
it is.
least have some connection to you as a teacher. Like
Sure.
hopefully they like you by that point, um, but they at
Yeah.
least like okay, I'll listen to what this guy has to say. And if you tell the story where you're in the story, which is what I always did, like this is what I went through. This is what me and my friends, because I
Yeah,
was
that's how I tell it. Yeah.
18-year-old or whatever.
Hmm.
And that's what when I made a video later on, I was like, I have to do this as well. And so I went to I filmed on location where I was living in the dorms as a young college student. And it kind of worked out because the building that I lived in was a, high-rise dorm building, and it was demolished just a few months after I filmed that. I said, "Oh, this
Oh,
building
wow.
behind me is going to get demolished," just to kind of like connect it also to those giant buildings going down. But yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to do crap like that because otherwise they're not going to give a crap. Why would they care?
Yeah.
And when we tell them, like even like you tell a Zoomer now, like we're trying to save democracy here, that doesn't even really mean that much to them. It's really sad, but this is why what we're doing right now is so freaking important, I guess.
I agree.
Yeah, I have the same issue even like with my kids, it's like I can see it. They just don't get it. You know what I
Doesn't
mean? Like they
register, yeah.
understand it. They understand its significance. They understand its importance. And, especially when younger, I have an 18-year-old, so he's like, he likes history to a degree until I start talking about it. Then it's like, oh God, here we go again.
Dad, you ruin everything.
Oh
Yeah, I can
God,
relate to
come on, you're
that.
gonna drone on forever now, Dad? Thanks. Like, um, but like, I love it when he starts asking me questions about stuff like that and like, how we reacted to it and stuff.
Sure.
It's weird. It has to be like, I always think about like, hey, Dad, where were you when like JFK was assassinated? It's the same thing. There's like, so for me, like, there's life before 9/11 and
That's
after
it.
that.
It's pre and post. Absolutely.
I think a lot about stuff. Like, I'm like, when did that happen? I was like, well,
100%. Yeah.
9/11 didn't happen yet.
You
I
know,
was
and I
telling,
was explaining that to my students because I said, look, you guys are gonna one day have to explain what life was like before COVID and after COVID, or the
yes.
shutdowns at least to your kids. You're gonna have to explain that to them. And they're gonna look at you blankly and be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Because all they're ever gonna know is post. That's it. And it's the same situation, and it's like I try to tell them, like, has anybody ever been to an airport? I'm like, it was a little different. It was a
Yeah.
little bit more freedom in those airports back. But then they look at me and they're like, it's an airport, dude. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
maybe that's an example, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to how do you explain to somebody what they've missed when they never had it, right? I mean, it just doesn't really register that way. You know,
Yeah. Well, that's why the first person accounts are like
sure.
the best way. It's like living through it.
Yeah.
That's the only time it's like you could kind of get a grasp because you're seeing it through their eyes, but you're still,
Yeah, there's still distance between it, and it's yeah, absolutely.
yeah, it was interesting. I told Brandon last week, by the way, that I escaped New York on 9/11. Just
So did my brother, my older brother did as well. His train was his last stop for work was this stop underneath the World Trade Center. And
oh,
so yeah, I didn't know until about
Wow.
7 o'clock that evening that he survived. It was
oh
nuts.
wow.
'Cause I lived in
Yes.
Long Island, so I mean we were right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was lucky. I left her. So I was like 50, I want to say on 51st, 52nd. I was
Mm.
working with my father at the time. And yeah, I just remember like somebody came in. We were doing it was like construction stuff. But and
Yeah.
it was go to college at night or whatever. But he somebody came in and was like, "Oh yeah, like two commuter planes hit each other and then hit the tower." Like there was the information was wrong. We're like, "That's
Mhm.
weird. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't really happen here." And like me and my dad were like, "Yeah, it's break time. Let's go get a coffee." And we went upstairs and it was like you could
Yeah.
see on the corner, obviously like New York, all the buildings are there, so you can't see anything. But
Mhm.
on the corner, you just saw people like snapping picture. Everybody was stopped. Like you knew something was up like, and bad. And it was kind of hazy, like there was smoke. And then I turned the corner and it was just like engulfed.
Yeah.
Then my
Wow.
father-in-law worked in the building and escaped. But he only
Really?
escaped. He was in the first tower on like the 60 something floor,
Holy
which
crap.
what he did was what his coworkers were like, you want to go get something to eat on the
No
50th
way.
floor? And he goes, you know what? I could use a diet soda. I don't want anything to eat. He went down to get a diet soda and he had to walk the whole way out. I mean, he was covered in soot and
So yeah.
he doesn't talk a lot about it. I mean, he
Yeah.
talks a little bit about it, but he doesn't. I've only heard him at like 9/11 things he's talked at, like get into like some of the horrifics to like the jumping
Goodness.
bodies and
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I went up to like the Holland Tunnel or something, and I was home by like 1, 2 o'clock. But
It's not bad. Yeah, my brother was. Do you ever see the videos of people being herded across the bridge and they're all covered in soot? My brother was one
he's
of
one of
those
them.
folks. Yeah, he's one of them. And
That was
you know,
wild.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
crazy.
And that
So
was wild because I was in the car when the towers fell. So me and my father, when we you could hear it happen. Like it's live, but you're listening on the radio and you just hear like, the twisting of metal, the collapsing of
Yeah.
all the building. And I'm thinking like it went that way. And I was like,
yeah,
oh my God, like, do you know how many people just died? And yeah, I mean, there's post 9/11, there's pre 9/11. That's what there is.
absolutely.
So,
How the heck do your kids not get into this? You guys are way closer to this than I was. I was in the middle of Kansas when this happened, and it had such an
yeah,
impact on me. Like you were freaking there. I just don't like these kids. Better start listening to you. I'm gonna
yeah.
whoop them.
I'll tell you what, I worked in across the street from there too, like the week before. I just got like reassigned to a
Jeez.
building. So
Jeez.
we always used to talk about that. I'm like, yeah, I used to go out, it was like a union job at the time, and I used to get everybody coffee and stuff. So like, would I be outside at 9:15, 9 o'clock, and weird stuff like that? But thank God.
Yeah.
Uh,
I know a lot. I'm sure you do too. I know a lot of people that lost people. And I know a
yeah,
lot of people. There was high school that my mother went to, Garden City High School on Long Island. Their senior class, because Long Island is an enclave. So is Jersey. So is Northern Jersey. It's an enclave for people who work in Manhattan. And and in that graduating class that year, there was something along the lines of like 22 seniors in that class lost parents. Like one or both. And it's just I couldn't imagine. This is crazy.
yeah,
That was my first year out of high school. I graduated that June and I was, working that September. That was nuts. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
but
yeah. And just the way it changed, it changed policy forever. Weird, the Patriot Act, things like that. So,
sure,
I mean, all this stuff is important. And I do tell them that. Like I talk about some of the security apparatus you have now.
sure,
Even the TikTok stuff, it's a lot of the legislation, it's only 16 pages, but a lot of the wording is like ripped straight from the Patriot Act.
Mhm.
The foreign entities wording and stuff like that. It's just there's a different world.
yeah. But then the world that we could see through Project 2025 could be a complete reversal with foreign policy there if we go more isolationist, because we certainly broke out of that isolationist mold. And we went, to the Bush doctrine, which was built off of the Truman doctrine, which is built off of the Reagan doctrine, spreading out, going further. And Project 2025 brings us further back in, right, to that America first and that nationalist sort of isolationist policy, except right when it comes to certain countries.
Well, that's where that Bush doctrine probably didn't work out, right? So I think
Sure.
there's a lot of people who grew up now and see foreign intervention as this evil, this bad. It was a waste attack. And a lot of it was, right? Iraq was
Sure.
definitely not what we were told it was.
You have kids.
Afghanistan.
You have kids that grown up in the war that have not seen the end of the war. You
True.
have, and they're like, well, I've just been at war the entire time. I don't think this is a great thing. Like, why are we doing this? Why is my taxpayer money? Why am I spending all this money on groceries and I'm having to foot a bill for these foreign wars?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before they pulled out of Afghanistan, I've been teaching a class on it and telling my students, you guys have never lived a day where the United States was not in war. Like your entire existence, this has been a thing, and to you it is so normalized. It is so, just second nature,
War is
and again,
peace.
yeah, exactly. And that goes back to the pre and post 9/11. I mean, that's what it goes back to, like there was a time where we weren't at war in the Middle East, and yeah,
These kids are also used to being spied on. Like,
Yes.
everything is I think we made a joke on your show about that when we were talking about inventions, right? With the refrigerator, you could get like the TV and the radio, and I was like, no, thanks, I don't want the spyware. I want the spy technology. I
On
don't,
my fridge. Yeah.
yeah, the
Absolutely.
wiretap function over there. I mean, it's, it's just, yeah, they grew up. It's different. These kids grew up with some weird stuff, though. They've been through, they've been through those wars. They've been through the Great Recession, been through
COVID.
COVID. I mean, to them, I mean,
I guess it makes sense why they're a little weird. Like I get it, they've been through some things,
So we'll be back, I think, in the next couple of weeks with an episode that's going to be focused on Project 2025 and the judiciary. And I think we're going to talk about Agenda 47 as well a bit, which is Trump's plans and how they tie to Project 2025. So before signing off, I'm Jay from the With Jay Burke Show.
I'm Smith from the Story of Podcast.
I'm Matt Beat from the channel Mr. Beat.
I'm Brandon from FDR's Wheelchair Podcast.
Thank you for listening to whatever this is called by the time it comes out.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the rest of our 4-part series on Project 2025. We're diving deep into what this initiative means for the future of public policy and how it could shape America. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll catch you in the next episode.